Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information, with some laughs, might I add. Hello everyone, I'm recording this on the last opportune moment. That's all I had time for, sorry about that. But in between my last spoiler video and now, I actually watched the entire first season of Doctor Who and the first 2 episodes of the second season. The show is pretty darn addicting. You get to see how much influence the show has had on other science fiction television, or how much influence other science fiction had on this. I'd say 80 to 90% of the cards I've already talked about all kind of harken back to that very first season of Doctor Who. It's really good. I highly recommend you give the show a shot. You could watch it on HBO. Without further ado, let's see if I can finish this up in a timely manner. Auton Soldier. This actually refers back to the very first episode. There's an alien that can control plastic. What this creature does is it enters as a copy of any creature, and it isn't legendary, and it has myriad. So not only are you breaking the legendary rule, but you get to break it multiple times on a single card. I love it. Gonna throw in my slot machine deck for sure. And my slot machine deck is Gyruda, by the way. The Master formed anew. You exile a creature you control with a takeover counter, and then this enters as a copy of that creature. But I think the real application of this card is because you put a takeover counter on it, should this be your commander, or you were running like some kind of reanimator package, you could have this re-enter, exile a new creature, and then have choices. And that's where this card really kind of flourishes. So it's a cool one. The Flood of Mars. It's a 3/3 with Island Walk. Put flood counters on creatures or lands. If you put the flood counter on, your opponent's lands, then you have an unblockable creature in your hands for everybody. The other thing is if you put this on a creature, though, you turn it into another Flood of Mars creature. Doomsday Confluence. Choose X. You may choose the same one more than once. Each player sacks a non-artifact creature. Put a 3/3 black Dalek into play. Each opponent discards a card. Since it's double X, I'm kind of not interested in this. The only double or triple X spells I play is Crackle with Power, and then that's about it. Comment below if anyone else feels the same way about multi-X spells out there. I wish the reward was just better. Sycorax Commander. This alien gets introduced in the last episode of season 1. For strike and haste, gives a villainous choice. That opponent either discards all the cards in their hand, then draws a many -1. So it's like a dark deal for a single person, or deals damage equal to the number of cards in that person's hand. This is pretty medium. You only get the villainous choice on ETB. Plus the villainous choice is too obvious. You're doing your opponent favors. Sometimes your opponents hate their hand, and they would be glad to just give it up. And you don't want to be doing anybody any favors in that regard.
Why should I help you?
The Rani. ETB or text, much better than the last person. Create a red aura enchantment named Mark of the Rani. Attach another creature. It has +2/+2 and goaded, so you're encouraged to enchant other people's stuff. It doesn't even care about enchanted, it just says goaded creature. Whenever a goaded creature deals damage to an opponent, investigate. That's kind of a cool trigger. I like this card a lot, actually. Delete. Deals X damage to each non-artifact creature in each player. It's a cool X spell. Hurts everybody and everything that's not an artifact creature. So if you're playing an artifact creature deck, you can make this one-sided. Osgood Operation Double. She makes a copy of herself that's not legendary, and you can use her to activate artifacts or cast artifact spells. And then whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than the hand, you investigate. So you can use her and her copy to crack those clues. It's a medium card. Sisterhood of Karn. Enters with a counter on it, or you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand. Double the number of counters on her. If this had evasion, I would like her a lot more, but I still think in the right decks you could get this pretty out of hand. Last Night Together. 5-mana sorcery. It's a additional combat spell. It's only for 2 creatures, but you size them up with 2 +1/+1 counters. And then they gave Vigilance, Indestructible, and Haste. The other thing that you have to be careful with is this does not give you a bonus main phase. So not all the additional combat cards out there give additional main phases, so you can't string them all together as easily as you would hope. Just keep that in mind if you're going to be throwing this in extra combat step decks. Sound of Drums. Goads a creature. Wow. When the enchanted creature deals damage to a permanent player, the damage is doubled. That's pretty scary. And then you can tap 3 to return from your graveyard to your hand. I like this enchantment a lot. Normally I don't go for the goated enchantment cards, but this one and the black one that was printed in Commander Masters, the Anakthea deck, I've been running the black one a lot and having a lot of fun with it. This one I imagine I'm going to be playing as well. Hopefully this ends up in the graveyard when it's just 2 people left. Vrestin Menoptera Leader. Oh god. Kind of reminds me of Venture Brothers. Because it's clearly some kind of moth looking thing. Enters with X counters on it. When it enters battlefield, create X 1/1 green-white alien insects with flying. Whenever attack with one or more insects, put a +1/+1 counter on all of them. At minimal, you have to pay at least 1 to put 1 counter on this, otherwise it dies. But putting a +1/+1 counter on all your insects, that seems like a pretty fun insect tribal commander. I don't think there's a lot of them out there that are viable to play. Maybe Vrestin's okay. Sergeant John Benton. Trample Haste, 2/4 for 3 mana. Whoa. You punch someone with this, and then you and that player each draw that many cards. Be careful who you hit with this. This is kind of like a pseudo hug deck because you're helping yourself and one other person. But like, you don't want to be beating on the weakest player. You want to be hitting the strongest player. So it feels like a bit of a non-bow, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't want to be giving the strongest player cards, and I don't want to be hurting the weakest player. So it's just like, I'm not a fan of this card at all. Dugan, Private Detective. 4-drop, power and toughness equal number of cards in your hand. Enters the battlefield or attacks, investigate. It does have a non-fight mechanic. You tap it in 2 mana to deal damage equal to twice its power to another target creature. Activate only once. That's lame. You can only do that 1 time. It doesn't say once till turn, it's just 1 time. I guess in this room full of furniture, you can only throw 1 piece of it. Everything else is bolted to the floor, so I guess that makes sense. I have no clue why it's only a 1-time activation. That's a pretty fair activation in my opinion too. Traverse Eternity. Draw cards equal to the highest mana value among historic permanents you control. I do love Russian Knowledge. This is like a slightly cheaper version of Russian Knowledge, but it's got more clauses in that you need a historic permanent. Alistar the Brigadier. We cast a historic spell to create a 1/1 white soldier. Whenever he attacks, you may pay 8. If you do, creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of historic permanents you control. I really don't like these really expensive triggered abilities. We saw one beforehand in one of my other spoiler videos. This is kind of a bummer. Even after you activate this, that's not even a guarantee that you win. It's no Crater Hoof. The Sea Devils. Chapters 1 and 2 make a salamander that has Island Walk. Final chapter, whenever salamander deals damage, deals that much damage to a creature that player controls. So not only do you get to get a free shot on people because the salamanders have Island Walk, but you get to influence the board a little bit too. 500-year diary. Enter tap, taps are a blue. For each clue you have, wow. I think your clue decks are going to like this a lot. You could also sack 500-year diary like a clue to draw a card. Ace's baseball bat. Equip creatures +3/+0. If the equip creatures attack, he gets first strike and must be blocked by a Dalek. I love cheap equipment that gives significant stat boosts. There aren't a lot of them out there. Since you only have to invest like 3 mana to Voltron up your commander, this is a pretty welcomed equipment in my book. Bessie the Doctor's Roadster. Haste. Whenever it attacks another target legendary creature can't be blocked this turn. It's weird because you basically want to be running this in some kind of Voltron strategy, but you're not probably running enough creatures in that deck to crew this and attack with both. So at least this has haste, so you can use it potentially the turn you have it. Maybe I'd run this in my Kellen deck because I make bodies incidentally. It's also cheap to play for 2 mana. 5 Doctors. It's kicker 5, so if you want to cast this and it's kicker, you invest 11 mana. Search your library and graveyard for up to 5 Doctors, reveal them, put them into hand. If it's kicked, put those cards on the battlefield instead. I'd say most of the Doctors is pretty fair. Even after you do this, you're probably not going to win the game with it. You're pursuing the 13 Doctors in play win condition from that blue-white enchantment, but
boy, that's a tough one.
I'd be impressed. I'd say if you're going to go for the 13 Doctor win cheat stuff in with like Maskwood Nexus and stuff. Nissa of the Traken. No max hand size, is a Doctor's Companion, and when it attacks, you could sack X artifacts. When you do, you get to tap X creatures and draw X cards. There's plenty of ways to make passive artifact tokens out there. I think this might actually be really strong. Normally, I disagree with like giving up resources, but since you're exchanging them for card advantage, I like this card a lot. Barbara Wright. Sagas you control have read ahead. Whoa. You know how I always gripe about how sagas, the effect you want doesn't happen immediately? This makes sure that happens every single time. If you are interested in playing a Saga deck, I think playing her as your Doctor Companion with whatever random doctor is going to be the Saga deck. Like, I think it's going to blow Tom Bombadil and Narsilli out of the water. That's like a chef's kiss right there. Tom Bombadil will welcome this too, but like, I'd rather have it guaranteed from my command zone personally. Ian Chesterton. Saga spell you cast has Replicate. Replicate cost equal to its mana cost. Hopefully you're not running too expensive Sagas, otherwise it'd be hard to take advantage of this, but again, Saga decks will be happy with this. Adric Mathematical Genius. 3 mana and tapping it, you get to copy an activated or triggered ability, or you could pay 2 mana to sack him to counter an activated or triggered ability. That's kind of a nice thing to have on deck. The sacrificing ability is not a tap ability, so if you have 2 mana up and something really scary is about to happen, just counter it. Why not? Romana II. You create a tap token of a copy of a target token and enter the field this turn. The only time you want to be making copies of tokens is if they're significant, and most tokens are not. To me, it's a 3/3 with Vigilance from the command zone, and then sometimes you get to make a token, and very rarely do you get to make a token that's significant. Leela Sevatim Warrior. Never opponent draws a card except for the first one. Put a +1/+1 counter on her. Honestly, I think we need more cards in Magic that punish farm decks because they're so popular. It's usually boils down to this: the person who can see the most cards and play the most cards wins the game of EDH. It's a simple equation, and we just need more things to interact with that. It's a welcome thing to see. It just sucks that she doesn't have any kind of evasion on her. The Cyber Controller. X and double black. Enters battlefield, each opponent mills X. Put all cards milled this way on the battlefield face down under your control. They're 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. This card kind of sucks.
Insolent pile of scrap iron!
You mill X cards and you only get to turn the creature cards you milled into Cybermen. They're vanilla, and then they get turned into 3/3s through the Cyber Controller. Not a fan of this card. Kind of a waste of your time. The Beast, Deathless Prince. It has an ETB trigger that steals someone else's creature against haste and menace, and it enters with 6 stun counters on it. Every creature deals damage to its owner. Untap the beast and draw a card. So that means you need to find and be playing the whole package of like, I steal your stuff and hit someone. Hopefully it connects so you could untap this and do it again. At least it cantrips, because you remove 1 on your untap step as well. By 1 revolution of the table, you'll be down to 4 stun counters, and this will still be untapped. This gives me a mixed bag of feelings about it. Because of that mixed bag, I'll probably never play this card, unfortunately. Cult of Skaro. It's a Dalek. When it attacks, choose one at random. Either put a +1/+1 counter on all your artifact creatures, draw 2 cards, create a 3/3 Dalek with menace. Each opponent loses 4 life. But I guess if you are going for infinite combats, you have a win condition even if you can't connect. So that's kind of nice. It's also not a damage trigger. So like, say someone has like a solitary confinement in play where you can't deal damage. Well, you get to draw cards until you find an answer, or B, drain everyone to death. Not a bad deal. This is how it ends. Target creature's owner shuffles it into their library, then faces a choice. Lose 5 life, or they shuffle another creature they own into their library. I hate choice cards where it's just too obvious. Like, if you're going to propose options, they need to both equally suck. And no one's going to give out 2 creatures. So they're just going to lose the 5 life unless they're on death's door, which doesn't happen that often. What if someone only has 1 creature, meaning they're just going to pick that and then have nothing else to shuffle away, and then they don't even lose the life anyways. Cyber Conversion. For 2 blue, you get to turn something face down. It's a 2/2. You just neuter someone's commander with this, because it's not until end of turn, it's permanent. And then people just avoid killing that creature like it was the plague. I like this card. It's also an instant. Most of these kinds of effects are sorcery speed, so that's pretty nice. The Toymaker's Trap. This card kind of sucks.
You're next, you airborne garbage bucket!
On your upkeep, you choose a number 1 through 5, and the number can't be chosen in the past. An opponent has to guess the number you chose. If they guess right, you have to sack it. If they guess wrong, they lose life equal to the number they guess, and you draw a card. So at max, you'll see 4 cards with this. Vislor Turlo has an ETB trigger that lets someone gain control of it and it becomes goaded. At the beginning of their end step, they draw a card and you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Ooh. This is actually a pretty good punishment for farm decks. I like it a lot. And you have access to it from your command zone. I like this more than the green creature for the same mana cost. Cyberman Squadron. Non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. Ooh. I can't think off the top of my head all the things that you can break with this, but I imagine it's pretty wild. Myriad's just a broken mechanic in general. Bashta Narada. 3 mana indestructible shadow creature. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's very similar to the Black Ghoul. That skeleton is just good for its raw power. This is slightly better, evasive and difficult to remove. The only thing that's different is that this creature's capped at getting 1 counter per end step, while the Ghoul can get counters equal to the number of creatures that die. That's the trade-off. Hunted by the Family. Choose up to 4 creatures you don't control. For each of them, a creature's controller has a villainous choice. The creature becomes a 1/1 with no abilities, or you create a token copy of it. I think the wise choice is always to let it turn into a 1/1. Who knows? If you copy commanders, maybe people are desperate enough to give you copies of their commander. I feel like this is a skill check card. It is 7 mana. It doesn't necessarily win you the game the turn you play it, so maybe giving you copies will matter. It's a situational card too, because it depends on your opponents having creatures in play, albeit 4 of them. Ensnared by Mara. Another villainous choice card. They exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. Then you may cast that card without paying its cost, or that player exiles the top 4 cards of their library, and Mara deals damage equal to the total mana value of the exiled cards to that player. This feels like a weird browbeat kind of effect. I think 10 out of 10 times people are going to choose the damage, so I don't like this card at all. It's not like the Red Gear Hulk where you could flicker it and take advantage of that, but this is a one-time kind of a deal, so not interested. Dalek Drone. ETB, destroy target creature an opponent controls. That player loses 3 life. For 5 mana, I guess it's fine. I like that's an ETB trigger, so you could abuse it. People play the Black Gear Hulk, so I don't see why not play this one. Honestly, though, your removal should be 2 mana or less. Time Reaper. Since people's commanders are in exile, you can take that card and put it on the bottom of their library. I like that I can snipe stuff out from the command zone. It also has haste. It starts paying dividends the moment you play it. Is unfortunate, though, is the rulings, because it's changing zones. The owner of the card gets to elect where it goes. They could be like, I elect to put it back in the command zone. So effectively all you're doing is raising the commander tax by 2. Maybe the Time Reaper isn't as good as I would have liked, but I don't know. There's plenty of scary commanders out there. Maybe that's good enough. Cybership. Crew 4 vehicle with flying. It's an 8/8. Holy cow. Deals damage to a player. Put the top 2 cards of that player's library into the battlefield face down your control. They're 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. Instead of whatever you were crewing before, you get to kind of offload the weight. Ashad the Lone Cyberman. The first non-legendary artifact has casualty 2. As you cast it, you may sack a creature with power 2 or greater. When you do, copy it. Whenever you sack another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Ashad. The first ability feeds into the bottom ability. This only triggers on cast and only triggers on the first one, so it's kind of a bummer. I think this card is a little too fair to be playable, especially in Grixis. There's too many popular commanders. Rassilon, the War President. I like the name of this creature. Beginning of your upkeep, you lose 2 life. Exile the top card of your library. You may play that card as long as it remains exiled. Each non-creature spell you cast has Conspire. If you tap 2 untapped creatures as you cast it, you may copy it. It's a unique card advantage commander, and then you're rewarded for playing non-creature spells, but you need creatures in play for Conspire to work, so it's kind of like a little bit of a non-bow. You want to pursue both equally so you could realistically get that Conspire trigger. But if you're generating tokens from your non-creature spells, it could be decent. Like the most recent one in this color pairing is Lord of the Nazgul. For 5 mana, or you cast an instant or sorcery, you make a 3/3 Wraith. Obviously, you're going to be playing a lot of instant sorceries in that deck to be pursuing getting 9 in play, so they all turn into 9/9s. It's just a little taxing. You have to pay 5 mana for the Lord of the Nazgul, you have to pay 5 mana for this, so maybe there's a better deck out there that is cheaper and more realistic to do this with. The Master Mesmerist. Tap target creature and opponent control with power less than this, gains Skulk until end of turn, and it's goated. Whenever a creature with Skulk deals damage to one of my opponents, I get to put a +1/+1 counter on the Master Mesmerist and draw a card. So this guy scales up to increase the amount of targets it can hit with its tap ability. The only stipulation that I'm worried about is the things you want to be goading are typically really powerful in terms of stat blocks, and you won't be able to target those things right off the bat with this. And that's the rub with this creature. I guess you could cheat its stat blocks by making it bigger. The damage trigger isn't guaranteed because Skulk is kind of a weak evasive keyword in the game, because creatures with Skulk could only be blocked by creatures of equal or lesser power. So it forces people to trade their stuff, or they can't block it at all. The Master Multiplied. Has Myriad legendary rule doesn't apply to creature tokens you control, so you make copies of this thing. If you have 3 opponents, you'll have 4 in play. Trigger abilities you control can't cause you to sack or exile creature tokens you control. Oh, so Myriad, the tokens have stapled on them on end step, you sack them. This prevents that from happening. Play this in extra combat decks. The Master, Gallifrey's End. Make them pay. Whenever a non-token artifact creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, choose an opponent with the most life among your opponents. They face a choice. They lose 4 life or create a token that's a copy of that card. Again,
I am very disappointed.
the choices are horrible. Like, it specifically cares about the player with the most life. Of course they're going to pay 4 life. Why wouldn't they? If you're going to have that 4 life clause, it should target the weakest player at the table, so they give you the token, because that would be a hard choice. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I give this a flavor fail for sure. That covers everything on the Doctor Who set. I was a bit of like a skeptical person when I first heard about Doctor Who, but I'm glad that I did the spoiler season and covered all the cards individually, because it got me interested in the show, and I ended up really loving the show. If you are nerdy enough to play Magic, you are nerdy enough to watch Doctor Who. And that's all I have to say. So everyone take care now. Bye.